Now, there are multiple examples in here, ranging from academia to industry to technology sectors, where Chinese intelligence and influence operations have totally penetrated these organizations, these institutions, and where the UK response has been almost non-existent. At one point, the report says it wonders whether the UK was even looking. It is really an incredible indictment of the lack of any policy. And I think they're particularly scathing about UK academia, which has been running after Chinese tie-ups, Chinese fees, China, all sorts of money with no questions asked, and in the process, effectively handing over extremely sensitive technology.
And Rishi Sunak said the government had taken measures to prevent interference by reducing Britain's reliance on Chinese technology, but he wanted to have open and constructive relations with China. But are we in a world where we can actually have those open and constructive relations?
It's very difficult. The government wants to have it every which way. They talk about being robust with China, but they also talk about engaging with China, particularly on issues of shared concern like climate change, but also where it comes to trade and investment. But the problem with that approach is that China hasn't hesitated to leverage trade, investment, market access as means of coercion. So that in trying to have it each way, every way, the policy that emerges is extremely incoherent.
It's intriguing. Some of the quotes actually from this report. The nature of China's engagement, influence and interference activity may be difficult to detect, it says. So how active do you think that Chinese agents in the UK are at the moment in tracking people who attack the regime in Beijing?
They are extremely active, and they are doing it in every and imaginable way. We think about conventional espionage, the spies from espionage novels, but Chinese way of espionage, the Communist Party way of espionage, has been characterized by the committee as whole of state. It involves many, many different aspects, formal and informal. It involves companies, state-owned companies, private companies. It involves researchers. It involves students. These are people who are co-opted by the Communist Party. At times, they have no real choice in that matter because Chinese law obliges these organizations to cooperate on national security. And this is why they define it as a whole of state assault on the UK, because it is it has multiple facets to it. And which is why, in a sense, the UK has not even begun to grasp the scale of the challenge it's facing.
Yeah, and I suppose, Ian, it's also important to point out that the report highlights that this is successive UK governments, not just the present government. One part of the report really highlights the UK's energy sector and says that it is possible to imagine that we are ceding control to the Chinese Communist Party. What control do the Chinese have over British energy?
I think they have been quite substantial investors in a number of different sectors, but one of the sectors which the report does highlight is, of course, the nuclear industry. In the heyday of George Osborne and David Cameron's attempt to make Britain China's best friend in the West, of course, China was invited to take a stake in the British nuclear industry and indeed to build its own nuclear power station, which is mind-boggling when you think about it in terms of what has come out since then. The government has been struggling since those agreements were signed in 2015 to extract China from those sectors, but has not yet completely done that. And the thought that you can invite the Communist Party of China into such a sensitive part of British infrastructure is quite remarkable. And I think the committee is pretty incredulous when they examine this. But you are right. They criticise a succession of British governments for failing to have a coherent policy. And the current government would argue that they are becoming more robust, that they have in place a number of measures to scrutinise investment more closely, to advise universities more closely about tie-ups and the money that they accept. But a lot of this is still untried. A lot of it is rather incoherent and sits rather uncomfortably with James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary's desire for greater engagement with China.
Ian, an absolute insight, a great insight speaking to you this morning. Thanks so much for your time. That's Ian Williams, the China expert and author of Fire of the Dragon, China's New Cold War.